This is Criminal Instincts with Sday, and tonight, Mosley reveals a crime planned in silence and betrayal.
Sunday morning, July 3rd, 2022. In the town of Mosley, Greater Manchester, weekends are typically quiet. At a residential complex on Riverside, a neighbor noticed that the front door to unit number 2 was standing open. From inside, the sound of a television drifted out, but no one answered his calls. Stepping into the hallway, the man discovered Thomas Campbell lying on the floor. The homeowner was found nearly unclothed. His wrists and ankles were tightly bound, with layers of heavy-duty duct tape. Medical examiners would later record dozens of puncture wounds and signs of thermal burns across his body. In the kitchen, empty electric kettles stood, still holding on to their heat. Nearby, investigators found traces of spilled granulated sugar. A puzzling detail at the scene of the crime was a professional-grade medical tourniquet applied to a deep wound on Campbell's leg. One of those involved in the aggression had apparently attempted to stem the blood loss. The victim's phone also lay on the floor. A call had been placed to emergency services, only to be cut off just a second after the connection was made. Police found no signs of forced entry. This discovery launched a massive investigation under the code name Operation Ravensburg. Officers began cordoning off the block, realizing that within the walls of this home, a calculated and methodical incident had unfolded over several hours. The task force's work at Riverside began with a meticulous sweep of the surrounding area. Since the locks on the door of Unit 2 were intact, investigators turned their attention to Thomas Campbell's means of transportation. His primary vehicle, a gray van, sat in the driveway. An initial technical inspection of the vehicle yielded a major breakthrough that shifted the entire direction of the investigation. Under the rear bumper, in a difficult-to-reach spot, detectives located a small black box held in place by a powerful magnet. It was a GPS tracker. The device was active, transmitting real-time location data. The presence of such a tool clearly indicated that Campbell had been under covert technical surveillance. This ruled out any theory of a random robbery. The crime had been planned in advance using sophisticated tracking technology. Police technical experts immediately seized the tracker to analyze its digital logs. They managed to reconstruct the device's movement history and, more importantly, determine the exact moment it was activated. It was revealed that the device had been attached to the vehicle a week before that tragic Saturday, on June 27, 2022. From that day on, the unidentified individuals were able to monitor Thomas's every route, knowing exactly when he left for work, his visits to the gym, and his return home. Simultaneously, a separate team of investigators was reviewing surveillance footage from the Riverside neighborhood, captured in the days leading up to the discovery of the body. The video revealed suspicious activity. A dark van was seen repeatedly driving past Campbell's home, slowing down, but never coming to a stop. A check of the vehicle's license plates showed they were clones. The actual plates belonged to an identical vehicle whose owner was in a completely different part of the country and had no connection to the incident. Data from the service provider helped complete the picture. Experts analyzed logs from nearby cell towers to identify mobile devices that were within range of the residence on the night of July 3rd. Among hundreds of routine signals, several devices stood out for their atypical behavior. They were active only during the window when the crime took place and moved in perfect synchronization with that same suspicious van. By Sunday evening, the investigation had a definitive list of technical evidence: GPS monitoring data, the routes of the cloned van, and mobile signals that tracked Thomas from the gym doors right to his own doorstep. It became clear that the perpetrators possessed insider information regarding the victim's habits, and their technical tools were simply used to strike at his moment of least protection. The investigation then shifted into a phase of identifying individuals who had access to the details of Campbell's personal schedule. 38-year-old Thomas Campbell had a reputation for a level of wealth that far exceeded any legal sources of income. His name had been appearing in local criminal records long before the events at Riverside. In 2019, a legal proceeding revealed the nature of his operations. Campbell was officially convicted of laundering funds generated from the large-scale trade of prohibited substances. At that time, investigators proved he was managing sums exceeding $125,000, all earned within the shadow economy. Thomas's lifestyle was intentionally public and high status. He owned a fleet of expensive vehicles and a collection of Rolex watches valued in the tens of thousands. This drive for flashy luxury wasn't confined to his private life. The story of his questionable accumulation of wealth and the subsequent seizure of assets by the state was even featured in the press. Campbell was a prominent figure in the local organized crime hierarchy, where the display of financial success was an essential part of the image. Despite his criminal history, in his daily life, Thomas was a father to a son and a daughter. His home in the high-end Mossley neighborhood was meant to be a safe haven, distanced from the risks of the street-level trade in prohibited substances. However, this is exactly where a critical dissonance emerged. A man with a history of involvement in serious criminal schemes had settled in an area where neighbors were accustomed to predictability and peace. Campbell stood out from the crowd not only because of the luxury vehicles in his driveway, but also due to his impressive athletic build, which he maintained through daily workouts. His life was governed by a strict schedule. Thomas spent a significant portion of his time at the gym, adhering to a fixed routine. He frequented the same establishment at the same time, returning home along a familiar route every few hours. This level of discipline became his greatest vulnerability under technical surveillance. The group that attached a GPS tracker under his van a week before the incident wasn't just tracking his movements, they were studying his biological rhythms and habits. Campbell's social media also served as an open-source intelligence goldmine for his adversaries. He made no secret of his purchases, designer clothes, and the locations he visited. In an underworld where information is the primary resource, Thomas essentially gave his enemies full access to his coordinates. By early July 2022, behind the exterior of a successful man was a target whose schedule was calculated down to the second. The wealth he had accumulated in a dangerous business shifted from a sign of power to the primary reason why preparations for a confrontation were already underway outside his Riverside home. Campbell continued to live by his schedule, unaware that his predictability had become a tool in the hands of those who knew more about him than he could have imagined. As detectives vetted Thomas Campbell's inner circle, their attention focused on his former spouse, Colleen Campbell. Despite their official divorce in 2021, after 10 years of marriage, their relationship remained close and complex. Colleen wasn't just a bystander to his success, she had been a full partner in his past. The couple had previously appeared in court together on charges of concealing illicit gains. While Thomas oversaw the shadow operations, Colleen managed the household budget, funneling funds into real estate and luxury goods. After the separation, Colleen continued living in the same area, maintaining access to confidential information about her former husband. She wasn't just familiar with the security codes to his residence, she knew the most minute details of his home life. She knew exactly where Thomas stashed his cash, the location of the original boxes for his expensive timepieces, and the specific windows of time when the house was most vulnerable. This specialized knowledge turned her into the only source capable of augmenting raw GPS data with a true understanding of the inner workings of the Riverside fortress. An analysis of Colleen's digital footprint uncovered unusual activity throughout June 2022. Her phone logs showed consistent communication with a man outside their usual social network. In these conversations, Colleen handed over detailed descriptions of Thomas's van, right down to the body color and the alphanumeric license plate. Furthermore, investigators tracked the sharing of his daily routine. She notified her contact exactly when Thomas would be home and when he would be at the gym, essentially neutralizing his security measures. Colleen's coordination with those planning the incident was built on providing a logistical corridor. Because she had keys and access codes, she could guarantee that the individuals involved wouldn't deal with locked doors or active alarms. In exchange for this help, there was a discussion about dividing the property they expected to take during the raid. Colleen believed the plan was for a fast-paced robbery, with the primary targets being the Rolexes Thomas so publicly displayed. The former wife's involvement served as the vital link between the criminal element and the victim's private world. Without her, the high-tech tracking would have been limited, as outside surveillance cannot bypass the walls of a secured home. Colleen effectively unlocked the door for those responsible for the aggression, transforming her intimate understanding of the family into a tool for the takeover. By the end of June, as Thomas focused on his business and raising his son and daughter, his former wife was finishing the transfer of the final data needed to make sure the trap at the Mosley house was perfectly set. The map of his vulnerability was fully drawn and delivered to the mastermind, the man Colleen Campbell was holding secret talks with in June 2022 was John Belfield. In the Manchester underworld, this 28-year-old had a reputation as an extremely dangerous and decisive player. His name was well known to police in connection with the distribution of prohibited substances and acts of aggression. However, in the case of Thomas Campbell, Belfield's interest wasn't limited to just a potential score of luxury watches or cash. Weeks before the tracker was placed on Thomas's van, a conflict had brewed in the personal lives of those involved, acting as a catalyst for what was to come. Belfield discovered that his ex-girlfriend had started dating Thomas Campbell. This overlap of interests turned a standard criminal calculation into a personal vendetta. Belfield began deliberately seeking ways to strike at Thomas, weaponizing the bitterness and insider knowledge provided by the man's former wife. Belfield's methods were marked by professional-grade preparation. It was he who initiated the placement of the GPS beacon and coordinated the flow of data from Colleen. In their communications, Belfield acted as the strategist. He organized the information regarding the victim's alarm codes and his training schedule. While Colleen was counting on a quick robbery, Belfield was assembling a team for a much harsher scenario designed to completely suppress Thomas's resistance. To pull off the plan, John needed associates ready for a physical confrontation with the powerful Campbell. He brought in his trusted contacts, dividing roles between a driver and an entry team. Belfield himself preferred to remain in the shadows, monitoring the process through mobile tracking apps. He personally verified that the tracker under Thomas's van was operational, ensuring the target never slipped out of sight for a single minute. Belfield's logic was straightforward. Use Colleen as the source for legitimate access and technology as the guarantee that Thomas would be caught off guard. By late June, the architect of the conspiracy already possessed a full map of the victim's movements and a list of valuables inside the home. Under his direction, the crew began scouting escape routes and testing the cloned van. Preparation entered its final phase, where Belfield's personal revenge was set to be carried out by hired hands, fueled by information obtained from the person who once knew Thomas best. For the enforcement side of the plan, John Belfield required men capable of a professional raid. By late June 2022, he had formed a group consisting of Stephen Reese, Thomas Redford, and Stephen Cleworth. These men weren't just random acquaintances. An analysis of their movements showed they had traveled to Greater Manchester from other regions, specifically to take part in Operation Ravensburg. The group divided the duties. Reese was responsible for technical support and logistics, while Redford and Cleworth formed the core of the entry team, ready for the physical suppression of the target. The primary preparation tool was a cloned van, a vehicle whose license plates were copied from a legal vehicle of the same model. Stephen Reese, acting as the driver, spent several days in Mossley scouting escape routes via rural backroads where license plate reader cameras were absent. The group used an encrypted communication channel where Belfield broadcast data from the GPS tracker fixed under Thomas Campbell's vehicle. The perpetrators weren't just watching him, they were studying his timing, how long Thomas spent at the gym, when he stopped for groceries, and the exact second he turned off the ignition at his doorstep at unit number 2. On July 1st, 2022, the day before the incident, the crew held a final meeting at a safe house. Thanks to information from Colleen Campbell, they knew that on Saturday, Thomas would be alone. His son and daughter were away visiting relatives. This window was the deciding factor. Cleworth and Redford prepared their gear, sets of identical dark clothing, masks, and bags containing tools for restraint. At local hardware stores, they purchased several rolls of heavy-duty duct tape and zip ties. By the evening of July 2nd, the logistical chain was complete. Stephen Reese took his position behind the wheel of the cloned van a few blocks from Riverside, while Belfield and the other participants approached the house on foot, utilizing the blind spots of surveillance cameras. The group remained in a holding pattern for over 90 minutes, watching their smartphones as the GPS coordinate marking Thomas Campbell's van began its final movement toward Mossley. All participants were in position, and the plan to enter the building was synchronized with the moment the homeowner deactivated his security system. Saturday, July 2nd, 2022, 8:52 p.m. Thomas Campbell pulled into his driveway. The moment he put the key in the lock and opened the front door, deactivating the alarm, 3 masked men surged from the shadows behind him. The aggression occurred instantly in the narrow hallway. Campbell, who was in peak physical condition, tried to fight back, but the numerical advantage and the surprise of the strike from behind left him with no chance. The perpetrators dragged him inside, slammed the door, and immediately began the process of immobilizing him using duct tape. Inside unit number 2 on Riverside, a television turned on. Either Thomas had activated it upon entry, or the perpetrators did so to create background noise. While Stephen Reese slowly patrolled the neighboring streets in the cloned van, Belfield, Redford, and Cleworth began a methodical search of the rooms. The victim was dragged into the kitchen, where Thomas's wrists and ankles were bound so tightly that he completely lost the ability to move. Electric kettles were placed on the stove and filled with water, while bags of sugar were set out nearby. The next 2 hours turned into a methodical ordeal. The perpetrators demanded that Thomas reveal the location of safes containing cash and his collection of Rolex watches. Every few minutes, the silence of the kitchen was shattered by the whistle of boiling kettles. The resulting mixture was poured over Thomas, causing severe tissue damage that medical examiners would later document. The aggression of the attackers knew no bounds. They ripped through furniture and tore up floorboards, ignoring the victim's cries. At 9:50 p.m., Campbell made a desperate attempt to save himself, managing to reach his phone and dial emergency services. But Belfield cut the call just a second after the connection was made. By 11 p.m., the house was completely ransacked, but the attackers hadn't found the volume of valuables they expected. Thomas was in a state of profound shock. Realizing that Campbell was losing too much blood, one of the perpetrators tightened a tourniquet on his injured leg. This was done solely to buy time. The perpetrators needed to clear the area before the body was discovered and minimize any trail of blood leading outside the home. In the early hours of July 3rd, the group gathered the stolen items and left Riverside, leaving Thomas on the kitchen floor. Stephen Reese, driving the cloned van, picked up the group at a prearranged location, and the vehicle vanished from the neighborhood's surveillance cameras forever, heading toward industrial zones. John Belfield's escape began in the very hours while Thomas Campbell's body still lay in the empty house on Riverside Street. As soon as Operation Ravensburg entered the active arrest phase, Belfield realized the digital footprint from the GPS tracker and cell phone pinging would inevitably lead investigators to him. While his accomplices were being detained in Manchester, the architect of the conspiracy managed to cross the border. He used a complex chain of movements through Europe before finally dropping off the radar by flying to South America. Belfield chose Suriname as his hideout, a country with minimal oversight and vast stretches of jungle. There, he attempted to start a new life under a false identity, drastically changing his appearance. However, detectives never stopped searching for a single day. After nearly a year of covert monitoring of financial flows and underworld contacts, Belfield's location was established. In March 2023, Suriname police, supported by international officers, carried out the capture right on the streets of the capital, Paramaribo. Despite his resistance and forged documents, Belfield's identity was immediately confirmed. Parallel to the international manhunt, court proceedings were underway for the other participants in the raid. The evidence was undeniable. Stephen Reese's fingerprints on the duct tape and Colleen Campbell's correspondence with Belfield formed the core of the prosecution. During the trials of 2023 and 2025, harsh sentences were handed down. John Belfield was found guilty of organizing the crime and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 38 years. His closest associate, Stephen Reese, received 37 years. Stephen Cleworth, who participated in the preparation and the incident, was also sentenced to a lengthy life term of 37 years. Colleen Campbell, whose intel on her husband's schedule and security codes provided the key to the home, was sentenced to 13 years for her role in the crime. The judge made it clear that without her cooperation, the incident would have been impossible. This investigation led to the complete dismantling of the criminal crew that expected an easy payday through the use of high-tech surveillance. But the most significant piece of evidence in this case wasn't the tracking device under the van. It was the calculated betrayal by the person closest to him, a choice that turned the peaceful neighborhood of Riverside into the scene of one of the most aggressive incidents in Manchester's history.